Yo, what's going on, you guys? Your boy Ben Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. I hope you all been having a good day, thus far, you guys. And much love to my brother LDBC brothers out there, man. Doing their work out there, bro. You know what I mean? And much love to all my subscribers that have been with me since day one. We had a great live stream last night. Going over the Hall of Fame for the class of 2020. Going to go down as probably one of the best, Hall of Fame inductions you're going to find in a very long time. But the Hall of Fame already is getting started on its class of 2021. And yesterday we already just had two new inductees into the Hall of Fame. We already got Ben Wallace and Paul Pierce. And just this morning, long overdue, Chris Webber finally got the call as he's now in the class of the 2021 Basketball Hall of Fame. And I'm going to tell you something. It was long overdue. Long overdue. You know me, Too Raw. I know Ticket. I know LB. I know, you know, LVZ's been talking about this. I have as well. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the critics out there, like Mr. Lamont Lane, FIF Sports Debates, has been one of the biggest critics of Chris Webber during this whole time. So today, this is pretty much a video is going to break down Webber's entire career, and this is going to be my chance to get my blowback at Mr. Lamont Lane, who's been hating on Chris Webber for since the last year, and we've had debates, on YouTube and off YouTube about this whole subject here. So, with that being said, let's get down to it here. Now, one of the big reasons why been a lot of people have been skeptical about Chris Webber's resume is about a couple of things. One, the fact is that people will say, "Oh, he didn't do enough. Oh, he didn't make up a lot of all-star teams. He didn't get his team over the hump and all that other stuff." All right, and the biggest one of all is that he accepted money from a booster when he was in college. Those are the three main, criticizing points that a lot of the critics like Lamont Lane like to point out the fact. All right, about Chris Webber. Now, I'm going to break this down. I'm going to break this down very, very skeptically. Okay. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to talk about Chris Webber accepting money from a booster, guess what? You're going to have to start calling out the same thing to all the other players, coaches, and executives and alumnus out there that pretty much took the same thing when they were in their respective colleges from boosters and alumnus during their times in college. All right. So nobody is buying into that crap of, oh, Weber's college career doesn't exist. Guess what? It did exist. It's on video, and we have all the tape in the world to prove that. And we have a whole documentary about the Fab Five that pretty much illustrates how big and how important Chris Webber was to that team. If Weber's not with that Michigan team, they don't make two straight trips to the national championship game. All right. That guy was the most important part of that team because of his versatility, his creative ball handling, and for his size. He was big, he was strong, he had big hands, and he could finish above the rim. All right. This guy was extremely important. And then also the other point, though, too, that I want to point out to Lamont Lane, I want to call him out on his BS about, is about the whole timeout situation. All right. Now let me say it like this. If you're gonna say the same thing about Chris Webber, you're gonna have to start doing the same thing to J.R. Smith in the 2018 NBA Finals when he egregiously thought that they were ahead when in fact the score was tied and didn't pass LeBron James the basketball. All right. So I don't want to hear that anymore. That argument about the whole Michigan booster thing is completely invalid. And the writers pretty much confirmed that because the fact is the NCAA is a bunch of hypocrites. They pretty much benefited on athletes, make on their skills and on their likenesses, and they make money off of it. They were doing it back then, and it's still going on even now, which is one of the big reasons why a lot of the states right now are starting to enforce the NCAA to start letting their athletes use their likeness to make money off of themselves because they're not getting any off of those benefits that the NCAA generally makes all the damn time. So that first argument debunked. Now, number two, he what a lot of the critics also like to talk about is that they say that, oh, Chris Webber's stats don't even compare to some of the other Hall of Famers. Well, I'd like to throw you guys a little stat here. This is an article from basically from Sports Illustrated of March of this year. When Chris Webber was healthy, all right, he averaged 23 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, 4.6 assists, 1.66 steals, and 1.6 blocks from 1994 all the way up to 2003. The number of players who matched that matrix during that 9-year span, here's how many. 0. Now, if you remove the steals and remove the blocks from the equation, it's still 0. And you narrowed it down to scoring and rebounding. There's only 2 people that basically are in that list, and they're already in the Hall of Fame. Tim Duncan and Shaquille O'Neal. All right. Here's the other thing, though, too. The fact that he was a 5-time All-Star tells you how difficult the 90s were during that period of time. Remember, when Webber came into the NBA during 1993, he was the number 1 overall pick. Okay? He wanted to play with Shaq in Orlando, but Shaq made up his mind that he wanted Penny Hardaway, and he forced the Magic to trade Webber to the Warriors for Anthony Hardaway. All right? Now remember this. Don Nelson did not want Webber in the first place. He originally wanted to trade the 3rd pick to Philadelphia for the number 2 pick for Sean Bradley. All right? Webber was only plan B in Nelson's mind because he wanted a big center to go along with his small ball lineup. And when they got Chris Webber, he wanted to transform him into a center, which did not play into his strengths because then he would have to go up against guys like Shaquille O'Neal, you know what I mean, Patrick Ewing, Akeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Alonzo Mourning every single night at the center position, which you can understand from that kind of perspective. And the fact is that Don Nelson made Chris Webber's life a living hell every single time and always criticized them on every little thing. It just made the whole Warriors dynamic just completely toxic, and it completely split the team. Remember, Don Nelson even started creating factions along the team as well, along with Tim Hardaway, who was out the entire year with a knee injury, and Chris Mullin. To say like when we don't get to the playoffs, and he pointed right at Webber as a big reason. All right, think about that. That plays into a rookie's mind because Don Nelson was the type of coach that didn't know how to handle young players. You know what I mean? He always was a hard knocks type of coach and was very innovative, but was not player friendly. All right. And a lot of the players like the Charles Sprewell and Billy Owens, they were seeing the same thing as well. Even though they made the playoffs and Webber won Rookie of the Year, it was just a toxic situation altogether. And because Webber had the clause in his contract that allowed him to basically use it to get out of it after 1 year, he used it because he couldn't deal with Don Nelson anymore. And who can blame him? And pretty much forced the trade to Washington. Now listen, you could talk about the fact that he only made 1 All-Star team during that entire stretch, but you also have to consider the players that he was playing against at the time. He had to go up against Penny Hardaway, Grant Hill, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and Shaquille O'Neal when he was in Orlando in the Eastern Conference. Those are 5 perennial all-stars and popular players that the fans gravitated the most than Webber. Even though Chris Webber, during that stretch, like I talked about, averaged 22 to 23 points per game during that stretch when he was healthy, the bottom line is he was going up against great players during that period of time. And so it was going to be difficult for him to get a spot on the all-star team. And you had to also consider the fact that he was only a reserve in that 97 All-Star game for the Eastern Conference when the Warriors were battling for a playoff spot during that same season. More importantly, that Bullets team was not a good organization altogether. They were a team that was still in complete disarray, and they only made the playoffs 1 time, and that was off of the talents of both Juwan Howard and Rod Strickland and Tracy Murray. But unfortunately, that team couldn't coexist together. And I will admit to this: Webber's off the field problems were becoming much more of an influence. So yes, there was some pushback about that. But you got to say the same thing for all the other players that went through the same familiar situations. All right. Now, the other thing too is this: people tend to forget, and I know a lot of Sacramento fans tend to forget about this too. When the Sacramento Kings made the trade for trading Mitch Richmond and Otis Thorpe to the Washington Wizards for Webber, it was not well received at the time. And Webber did not want to go to Sacramento. He actually wanted to stay in Washington. It was not his choice. He had to learn to love playing in Sacramento. All right? And it was there in Sacramento that he had the best years of his career by far and helped that Sacramento team to become not just become a really good team, they became a title contender in nearly 4 seasons. Okay? Let's think about this for a moment. during the 7 seasons he played in Sacramento, which is the most seasons out of any other team that he's played with, he averaged 23.5 points per game. In terms of total rebounding, he averaged 10.5 rebounds per game, 4.8 assists per game, also 1.5 steals and 1.5 blocks. And his free throw shooting, which was historically bad at the time, improved dramatically to 60 to 70%. So, and the other thing too that people tend to forget is that a lot of players knew how great Chris Webber was. Robert Horry in that same article even talked about the fact that you know during that time he was a very talented player. He was athletic, big body, able to move with grace, like a lot of bigs don't have, and also talented around the rim, shot, touch. His jumper wasn't pretty, but it was always effective. But he was always a great passer out of that high post, especially out of Rick Adelman's, quick, quick hidden Princeton offense that really made the Kings a title contender. When you surrounded him with Mike Bibby, with Doug Christie, Peja Stojakovic, uh, Vlade Divac, and then you had Hito Turkoglu off your bench, and then you got Bobby Jackson off your bench, Scott Pollard off your bench. Bro, that team was a title contender. And if it wasn't for that egregious, horrible game in Game 6 of that Western Conference Finals against the Lakers, they would have won the 2002 NBA championship. Okay? And remember, when he got to Sacramento, he made basically 4 straight All-Star appearances and started in the All-Star game twice. That's another thing that people tend to forget about how great this guy was. All right? And the third thing too of all is as simple as this: when you basically try to talk about Weber in the terms about his whole entire totality of his career, it doesn't do him a justice. You can look at all the analytics and look at all the statistics if you want, but if you don't watch the games like a lot of us do and understand how the games were at the time and what he had to go through during that period, when you say, "Oh, he didn't make it NBA Finals," that's egregious because the fact is, Chris Webber had to go up against phenomenal teams in the West. Shaq and Kobe Lakers, they had to face 3 times, and they lost all 3 times during that same stretch. The Dallas Mavericks, you know what I mean, with Dirk Nowitzki and Steve Nash. That was the same year in 2003 when Webber tore the meniscus in his knee that pretty much derailed his career at age 30. All right? And also Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs. Even though they never met each other in the playoffs, they were still a team that the Kings had to contend with in the Western Conference during the regular season. All right? And also Kevin Garnett and his Timberwolves, where they met in 2004, which was one of the best 7-game series I ever witnessed. And people want to talk about how Webber really didn't show up in that series. Bro, he was recovering from knee surgery. And he was basically still wasn't the effective player because remember, in that '04 season, he only played 23 games. Played only 23 games and was averaging 18 and a half points per game. All right. He was not the same player that he once was before. And sadly, he was never going to be ever again. So I don't want to hear this anymore. I don't want to hear the notion about, oh, he sent the money from the booster because let's be real about something here. NCAA and a lot of their programs are doing the same thing today, and they were doing the same thing back then. The only difference was that Michigan was the one that were the guys that got caught. All right, so think with all the other programs that's been going on right here, right now. And so for this Lamont Lane that tried to make the notion that Weber does not belong in the Hall of Fame, guess what? You got to eat your words now, Lamont. You got to eat your words now because the fact is, all the arguments that you made are completely invalid. And the fact is, the writers saw it the way we saw it. All right. And by the way, the other thing too is about what is the standard to get into the Hall of Fame? There is no standard. Everybody's standard, everybody's resume is not always going to be the same. There's always going to be cases where you're just going to have to break down and watch the games. If you never watched the games or never covered the teams, you really are not understanding how great of a player was. Sometimes the stat sheet, analytics, doesn't always tell the story. If you haven't never watched the games and never seen those guys at their best, you're not doing yourself a favor when it comes down to the Hall of Fame. And thankfully, this was the Basketball Hall of Fame because if this were baseball, I guarantee you that those writers are going basically would have nitpicked every single little detail in his Weber's argument, and they would held them off for at least 10 years. You know what I mean? The fact that it took 8 years is egregious in of itself. But more importantly, I think what people need to understand is that there was going to be a lot of great players that were coming up that are going to be that actually had to go, that Weber had to go up against, and that would have made it much more difficult for him to get in the Hall of Fame. So the fact that it took this long is egregious, but better late than never. And so, Mr. Lamont Lane, you got to eat your words for a very, very long time. And no matter what you try to say, no matter how hard you try to justify it, guess what, bro? Chris Webber's in the Hall of Fame. He's in a rightful place, and he's going to go down as one of the greatest power forwards of that period. And in fact, to be honest with you, the fact that I saw Webber, Duncan, Garnett, Nowitzki, Kobe, and Nash, Kid, you know what I mean? Also McGrady, and also a little side note about McGrady. People want to keep saying that McGrady is worthy of a first ballot Hall of Fame induction, despite the fact that he never made it out of the first round, and also blew a 3-1 lead in the 2003 playoffs against Ben Wallace and the Detroit Pistons. All right, I'm not saying that McGrady's not worthy of his induction, but first ballot, come on, bro, that makes no sense to me. Really, it does not make any sense. But back to my point, Iverson, you know what I mean, Ray Allen, these guys were part of my childhood and watching basketball. And the fact that they're actually getting their just due of getting into the Hall of Fame speaks volumes of how great that 2000s decade was of basketball, what truly was. You know what I mean? And so I'm happy that Chris Webber got his due and he's in his rightful place in the Hall of Fame. And any other argument that y'all want to make up, all y'all arguments that you want to say that Webber's not a Hall of Famer and all that, you can put that to bed now because he's in the Hall of Fame and you can never take that away from him. That's right, Lamont. You will never take that away from him. He's in his rightful place, and you're gonna have to start eating your words for a very, very long time. And I'm gonna make sure you eat those words while I'm at it. So that's my 2 cents. Congratulations to Chris Webber on making the Hall of Fame. I can't wait to hear your speech either this year or hopefully by next year. I don't know how they're gonna do this, but congratulations. You're finally into the Hall of Fame, and I hope so too. And another thing, I hope that Chris Webber can finally rekindle his relationship with Jalen Rose and finally put this feud to bed now that he's in the Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? Because really, bro, that whole feud between him and Jalen is becoming much more ridiculous. They just need to find. They need to take some time away from the media. And now that Chris Webber's now no longer working for TNT, hopefully they'll give the opportunity for both Jalen and him to finally sit down and really, rekindle their relationship. Because quite frankly, man, that whole relationship is the whole feud is just becoming much more ridiculous. And I hope that this induction can finally put some peace between the two. But that's just my 2 cents. Congratulations to Chris Webber on making the Hall of Fame. Can't wait to hear your speech. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below, and I'll be back later on today with some more videos and some more content. Peace.